Welcome to a discussion devoted to active citizenship, sponsored by the IU South Bend College of Liberal Arts and Sciences. 3 former mayors of South Bend join us today to discuss taking a more active role in your community. Roger Parent, Steve Lueck, and Joe Kernan, who also served as governor of Indiana. And I'm Jamie Smith, assistant professor of political science at IU South Bend. Thank you for joining us today, gentlemen.
Great to be with you.
What we're trying to understand today is a skill set or a pathway to becoming an active citizen at the community level or at any level of engagement or politics. We're also calling that kind of skill set what you might think of as a toolkit. And so we were hoping that we could just hear from each of you about your path to becoming an active citizen, both as an elected official, but also as a citizen of the community, the state, the country. So Mayor Lueck, would you like to share first?
Sure. I think of citizenship as really claiming ownership of the community that we live in, taking responsibility for where we live. And first off, I had great examples from my parents. My mom was involved in every activity at the school. My dad was on the park board in my hometown. But when we moved here, we got involved in our local neighborhood organization, near Northwest neighborhood, and helped with neighborhood cleanups, brought attention to the city about things that needed to happen in the neighborhood. And then I went to work for a local not-for-profit, South Bend Heritage Foundation, that was doing community organizing and, again, trying to fix up neighborhoods. That's what got me interested in city government and what Mayor Parent was doing at that time with the city, and led me to run for city council. Got beat the first time, but a lot of politicians did, and was successful. Second time around, served 9 years on the city council, and then had the great fortune to serve as mayor. But there's so many different, I think, entrees, whether it's through your place of worship, through service clubs, through your neighborhood organization, through not-for-profit organizations, that people can really claim ownership for their community and help to make it a better place.
Great, thank you. Governor Kernan.
I, like Steve, had parents that were very active politically. My father is a precinct captain in Chicago. I remember going around with him when I was 3 or 4, and him knocking on doors in Chicago. We moved to South Bend, and my dad ran for office a couple of times, got beat both times. But there was never any animosity or any change in the way that he viewed the community and my mom viewed the community. And I think it comes down to a couple things among those that Steve has mentioned, and one is caring, is just being willing to step out and be a good citizen, which means that you're obeying the law, but at the same time, you can be a good citizen by helping somebody walk across the street, just as much as you can be a good citizen by being a policeman. And it's, I think we really have been blessed in this community to have some people that certainly have been involved with the 3 of us over the course of our time in office, with people like John Hunt, Jeff Gibney, and others that didn't necessarily have to serve, could have made a lot more money doing other things, but decided that they wanted to get engaged in city government and really in the broader community. And I just think it's being willing to step out of your routine and get involved in things that will be of benefit to the community.
It's interesting as I hear both Steve and Joe talk. I'm from northern Maine originally, in a very, very small rural community. And in helping your neighbor there is a very personal kind of a thing. You don't think of it in the abstract. And so my parents would send me to help a neighbor, an old neighbor. And I remember once I went to the store for an old neighbor and came back, and the lady gave me a nickel. That's an ice cream cone then, by the way. And so my mother told me to bring it back. You don't help your neighbor, you don't get paid for that kind of stuff. And later on, I went in the Peace Corps and then came to South Bend by way of Notre Dame. And I started working in the old anti-poverty programs, but I had that history of caring for the neighbor, which I learned from the home, and that's what I hear them say. Eventually decided that running for the city council, I might be able to do more. I might have to be able to have more influence, that kind of thing, to make my community a better place to live. And along the way, I learned a lot of things. I was very, very shy, and in fact, still am to a large extent. But I had to learn to get out of that shyness, had to learn about the community. And I think there's all kinds of ways for people to get involved. Sometimes people look at politicians and think, well, this is the way to do it, I want to do it. But you can do it through your church, through the organizations that exist in the community. And it's been a terribly satisfying life for me. I've been pretty much involved in my community most of my life.
Sounds like across the board, to some extent, it might be in the blood. It runs through the families, but it also sounds like it's interactions you have with people, with organizations at the grassroots level. If we're talking about specific skills, when you were first getting involved, did you feel like there was something that you brought to the table for the groups that you were involved with at first? Governor Kernan, do you want to take that one?
My first engagement with city government was when Roger had been elected, and I was peddling paper products, and I called on Pete Mullen as one of my customers, and he said, you know, you ought to become city controller. That was the job he had under Mayor Nemeth, and I said, well, why would I want to do that? He said, well, it's you know, it's a good job. You'll have a good time. You'll be able to do some good things. It's got some real responsibility, and as city controller. And I said, well, I'm not a bean counter. And he said, well, you can hire a bean counter. Don't worry about that stuff. But you're engaged at a much higher level. And so I called Roger and told him that I would be interested in becoming city controller if he thought it was a good idea. And so he called me back and said, how would you like to be the head of the waterworks? And I said, no, I don't want to be the head of the waterworks. I don't remember that. Yeah. I said, no, I'm sorry. You can take my name off the list. And so Roger came back, and I ended up becoming city controller. And for me, I'd been in sales with a really good company, was making pretty good money, but I wasn't doing anything that was connected to the city that I love. And I thought that this was an opportunity for me to get engaged in the city and to really do things and be a part of what I think is something special, and that is that's our city.
Mayor Lueck, it sounds like also networking, being a part of a network, social networks, political networks are important in this. Any advice on how to get involved with those types of groups? I mean, if you're going to a group like your neighborhood association that you mentioned, is it just showing up? What else can you do to make sure that you get socially involved with a group like that?
Well, show up and be involved. You know, you have to be part of the committee. You have to go out and take part in the neighborhood cleanup. You have to staff the bake sales or the other things. Yeah, I think that's really roll up your sleeves and get your hands dirty and be part of whatever activity it is that's going on. And that's, again, whether it's a neighborhood organization or Rotary doing a service project, or again through your place of worship, lots of different ways to do that. You know, I was thinking when Joe was talking about some of the maybe softer skills, if you will, that are important, I think, in good citizenship is the ability to listen well, to hear what people have to say. So many of the problems that we have in our communities nowadays are because people are talking past each other and not really communicating. And so also then the ability to be able to communicate your point of view without being combative about it, and to have empathy, to really take a big view of the community and see where things are going well, maybe where things need some assistance, and then to be able to jump into those areas and help out.
And Mayor Parent, building off of that a little bit, good listening skills, empathy, are there other specific skills or characteristics you think really help someone to become an effective, active citizen?
Oh, yeah, I think it's very important to listen and to do all those things. But sometimes people are hesitant. They're hesitant to take the first step. They worry about what people might say. Maybe they won't be accepted. You take all that. So, my advice is don't worry about the second and the third and the fourth step because you'll never get anything done. Just go ahead and offer your services. It could be in a political campaign, which for people interested in politics, it's very, very important. You learn a whole lot in a political campaign. But I think also joining various sorts of groups in the community, they're waiting sometimes for you to come. And if you go and you say, I'd like to be involved, then you learn about what the need is, what community is. And one of the things that scares me now and then is we don't listen enough. We don't really know what problems exist in the community and or in your neighborhood. If you don't know your neighbor, how do you know the neighbor needs help? So you got to take the step and find out. But I think that all those things are terribly important. The ability to put yourself in a person's shoes. And I would say that my stint in the Peace Corps for a couple of years taught me that people think differently than I did. It was a very, very different sort of environment. Well, right here in South Bend, people think very differently than I did at the time or think today. So you got to listen, put yourself in other people's shoes.
I think, you talked about volunteering, which is, of course, critical, but the other thing is being willing to ask people to help. Joe, you said that Pete asked you to consider running for controller, and again, I think, we call it a vocation because people have been called, and so it's not only stepping forth on our part, but also asking others to get involved because sometimes people are a little hesitant, and I think that that's an important part of the process of building coalitions.
To build on that, or to continue, the most powerful thing that I thought I ever did as a politician and as an elected official, but also even now, is to ask people for help. If you need help, you go out and ask. It's the reverse of what you're talking about. You offer the help, but you ask for help. And I've never known anybody to refuse me in all the days that I asked for help. Maybe I wasn't asking for enough. I don't know. Joe, what do you think?
Well, I think certainly if we didn't ask for help when we were running for office, we wouldn't have been in office. And you end up, I think for me, the most important thing is to be informed, be an informed citizen, so that when election time rolls around, you're not sitting back and saying, well, my vote doesn't count. It's just the same old people that are running. They're all crooked and all of those kinds of things that particularly some news channels like to talk about how corrupt government is and all of those things. We're unique in that we have the opportunity to be able to choose the people that are going to represent us. And if you are going to elect people that have no idea what they're doing or are up to no good, then you have thrown your vote away. But if you take the time to learn about what people think about, you end up with people that will be attracted and will be there for good reasons, which is to help make sure that our government continues to represent the people in all proper ways. And I think particularly true for, Jamie, the students that you've got. We need good young people to get engaged in government, to get engaged in public service. Because if you look around, it's pretty easy to see that we need a lot of help in that area. And it goes back to shouting at each other and not listening and people that are there to just protect themselves for the next election. And I just think getting young people engaged, and this generation of young people they're colorblind, they're gender blind, and they are very open to new ideas, to the kinds of things that they make sense. They're not angry. they get it. Look what's happened over the course of really just several months with gay marriage in Indiana. Who'd have thought? Particularly with the leadership that we've got in the state. You know, thank God it happened. So I think that there are lots of opportunities for young people particularly to not just be satisfied with the status quo, but to take their engagement up a notch and really make a difference. And you do that by voting, first and foremost.
So I'm hearing, get informed, don't be afraid to roll up your sleeves and get involved. Don't just stay home every day. If you know, get to know your neighbors, be a good listener. Any other final comments on that skill set? Anything we've left out?
Know when to keep your mouth shut.
Well, yeah, that's right. Well, I haven't learned that yet, Joe. I'm sorry. But I think there's something that's also important is if you're going to effect change, you have to have the courage to get out front and to talk about things that people don't want to hear about. And that's a skill set that's necessary for leadership.
Even in the face of being turned away, maybe the first or second
Oh,
time,
yeah.
that persistence and
Well,
courage.
yeah. Well, you don't always maybe start off by going somewhere and saying, I want to change the whole thing inside out, but you build yourself up to some level where the opportunities, not only there, the responsibility is there to step forward and either make a decision or make a statement that's difficult for people to hear or to understand.
I think Roger, hit the nail pretty good. President Kennedy, when he was recuperating from his war wounds in World War II, wrote a book, Profiles in Courage. And I teach a government class at Notre Dame, and I buy all of the kids in the class the book and give it to them. And again, I think it just tells the story of courage, of a willingness to step out. In those days, primarily, I mean, if we're going back to 1820, or it really took some guts to stand up. You know, you might end up in a duel if you. But it's the same kind of thing that you just have to have the courage to do what you think is right, and so I would recommend that every student should have to read Profiles in Courage.
Yeah, the one other characteristic I would say is to really find allies, to build coalitions, that none of us can do things alone. We always need to work. We work better when we work as a group, first off because we get that additional input, but also it just takes more than one to make a change. One can start the change, but it takes more than one to make a change.
You're only as good as your ball club.